What's up, everybody? Today I'm here to bring you a collection tour video of all of my adult horror books. Now, just today, right before I started filming this, I got a new bookshelf delivered and set it up today, and I'm very excited about that because you can't tell on the video, but I just have piles and piles of books on the floor around me. So I'm very excited to get a lot of these off the floor and finally display on the shelves. And today I thought I would be going through all of my adult horror books because while I have a lot of other books in my collection that I still don't have the shelf space for, I like to primarily focus on my adult horror books and getting these displayed because that's probably what I have the majority of in my collection that's not already displayed. You can probably see over here like my Goosebumps and my Fear Street shelf. So yeah, before I just load up my new bookshelf, I figured I'd go through and kind of give you guys a little tour of my adult horror collection. So yeah, most of these books are like vintage horror books, kind of, not necessarily classics, but like from the 70s and 80s. I do have a few more modern books in here from like the 2000s. I have, and then I also have like a few random books in here that aren't exactly horror, but I kind of just lump them together in this collection shelf anyway because I don't know where else to put them. They're kind of out of place. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. I have them somewhat organized by author, but it's kind of messy, so we're not going in like any exact order or anything. This might be a little bit of a mess here, but yeah. Let's start with the hardcovers. I don't have a ton of hardcovers, but I do have some. So the first one is Intensity by Dean Koontz, one of my all-time favorite books. I also have the hardcover of Odd Thomas by Dean Koontz. Basically, I just try to collect the hardcovers of books that I really like. For the most part, I just like to have paperbacks since they're smaller, more compact, easy to store, that kind of thing. But for books I really like, I like having nice hardcover copies of. We have The Bad Place, and I believe this is my last Dean Koontz one. I also might stop and edit the video. I might have to like get up and move books around and grab like another stack, so just a warning, I guess. We have one book that's not a horror novel, but I have it in with my hardcovers because I don't have that many hardcovers. So I just kind of put it with those. But this is not a horror novel. This is A Time to Kill by John Grisham. And this is a book that I really want to reread. I read this a long, long time ago. This was actually one of the very first adult novels that I ever read. This is more like a suspense, thriller, drama kind of. And I remember loving it and thinking it was amazing. But I was also very young when I read it, and I've been meaning to get around to rereading it. I just haven't done it yet. But yeah, I have this. I have The Living Dead, a novel by George Romero and Daniel Kraus. I did read this already. It was okay. I really liked the first half of this book that was written by George Romero. Unfortunately, he passed away before he was able to finish the book. And then Daniel Kraus took over and wrote the last, I don't know, like 30% of the book or so. And I don't think he did a very good job. That's just my opinion. But yeah, we have that. We have The Complete Tales and Poems by Edgar Allan Poe. I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly because I have a lot of books here. The Complete Fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. This is not like all of his poetry and other stuff that he wrote. This is just all of his stories. I still need to get his collection of poetry. I plan on buying that sometime soon. Okay, moving on to the next stack of hardcovers, we have Monsters in Our Midst by Robert Bloch, which is a short story collection. And this is kind of a weird hardcover. It's a little bit smaller than the other ones. I don't really like that. I'm not sure why it's smaller. It kind of sticks out being shorter than the other ones. It annoys me a little bit, like my OCD, but yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. We have another anthology edited by Robert Bloch. This one is Psychos. I have read this one. Pretty mixed bag. There are some really good stories in here and a few not so good ones. But yeah, this is a pretty cool horror anthology. We have one that's not a horror novel. This is actually The Complete Folk and Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm. I love old fairy tales, and yeah, I just have this with my hardcovers because, again, I don't really have a lot of hardcover books, so I kind of am just all lumping them together, even though there's a couple of them that aren't horror books. We have another one. This one is Scary Stories Treasury by Alvin Schwartz. This has all 3 of the Scary Stories books in it. Look at that artwork. Absolutely terrifying. This book is probably scarier than most of the actual adult horror novels that I own. We have Dennis Lehane, Shutter Island. I have read this, but it's been a while. This is also one I would like to reread at some point to see how well it holds up, because I read this, I don't remember, in my teens, early teens maybe. But yeah, I remember thinking it was good. We have a couple of Ramsey Campbell hardcover books to close out my hardcover collection. This one is Midnight Sun. And then this one is The Hungry Moon. I have not read anything by Ramsey Campbell yet. Actually, I lie. I've read a couple of his short stories here and there, like in anthology collections, but I have not read any of his novels, so I need to get to these at some point. Then I have Paperbacks from Hell, which is a history of horror books from the 70s and 80s. This is a really, really cool book. Okay, before we get into the more like vintage paperbacks, I have a few newer books I thought I'd cover here. So we have The Troop by Nick Cutter. This was a fantastic book. I really enjoyed this. We have Carney by Regina St. Clair. This was a pretty good book. I liked it. We have Served Cold, a horror tube anthology. This was an alright book. Again, a short story collection, so kind of mixed. Some stories were better than others, but yeah. We have Code Red, also by Regina St. Clair. I really, really enjoyed this one. This was a great book. We have Autumn Crow by Cameron Shaney. And I like this one. It was decent. Again, with the short story collection, some stories I like more than others, but yeah, it's a pretty decent book. Lurking in the Dark, a horror tube anthology. This was also edited by Regina St. Clair, and I may or may not have a short story in here. We have Poking Holes by Juan Valencia, a good friend of mine and fellow booktuber, actually. And this book, fair warning, is very disturbing. This is not for the faint-hearted. I actually did not read all of the stories in here. I contacted Juan about this book because he knows I'm a little bit hesitant delving into that more extreme territory of stories. And he warned me that the first couple might not be my cup of tea, so I skipped the first couple stories in here. But some of the others I actually really enjoyed. They were pretty dark and disturbing, but they were also very good. So yeah, Poking Holes. And then this one is Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf. This is kind of like not really a graphic novel, but there's a lot of illustrations and stuff in here. It's more a novella. It's a very short book. I have read this, and it was okay. I actually prefer the movie adaptation a little bit over this book. But yeah, this was still alright. Okay, since I just showed off a Stephen King book, I figured I would grab my stack of Stephen King books here. I think I have all of them in this stack. I'll probably find one that pops up later. But I believe this is all my Stephen King paperbacks. We have Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which I started reading this last year, I believe. I made it like a quarter of the way through, and I gave this a soft DNF. I was getting kind of burnt out on Stephen King's writing style, and there were some stories in here that just drag on and on. Even in short story form, Stephen King is just way too wordy. They're longer than they need to be. And while there were a couple of stories in here I liked and I thought were good, there were also quite a few that I did not care for, and that just made it even more of a slog to get through. So yeah, I read like the first, 5 or 6 stories in here and kind of put it down to return to at some future date. I don't know. But yeah, that's Nightmares and Dreamscapes. We have Salem's Lot, which I've read and is very, very good. One of my favorite Stephen King books. We have Misery, which is probably my favorite King novel. It's kind of in contention with Salem's Lot, but I think I enjoy Misery slightly more. We have Thinner. I have read this, and it was decent. I liked it. Not one of my top favorites. Skeleton Crew. I have read this one as well. Some great stories in here, some not so great ones. We have On Writing, which is actually a nonfiction book from Stephen King about, well, the art of writing. I have not read this yet, but I am excited to check this out at some point. And then this last one is also a nonfiction book from Stephen King. This one is called Dance Macabre, which I believe is also kind of about writing in horror, in literature, and all that sort of thing. Have not read it yet, so not much of a comment on this one. Okay, moving on to kind of a random stack here. We have The Freak by Eleanor Robinson. Don't know much about this book. I just saw it at a used bookstore for like $2 and bought it. So yeah. We have The Place by T.M. Wright. I really hope these are showing up okay on the screen. I'll be really mad if they're not, because there is kind of like a bright light coming in through the window. I really hope that it's not like glaring and just obscuring the entire cover. I will be upset because I'm not stopping to check and re-record all of this. So hopefully you guys can see these covers okay. I'm trying to like tilt them a little bit away from the window. This one is called The Wrath by David Robbins. Really cool cover there. And again, most of these I just found out at used bookstores for cheap. I don't really seek these out online a whole lot. A lot of these books I've never even heard of. I don't know if they're any good. Most of the time, most of the books you're seeing here are just ones I find out at used bookstores for like $2, $3 each, and I think, why not? I'll buy it. This one is Ferocity by Stephen Laws. This one is The Pet by Charles Grant, which appears to be about an undead killer horse, I guess. I don't know. I love the cover of it, though. It's absolutely gorgeous. I don't know how well you can make it out, but this, like, black skeleton horse with, like, green mist coming out of his eyes and mouth. I don't know. It's super cool. We have The Devouring by Douglas Hawke. Then we have Moonfall by Tamara Thorne. Never heard of this. Again, just a book I came across out of the used bookstore, so yeah. Okay, on to the next stack. We have All Heads Turn When the Hunt Goes by John Ferris. We have Nightfall, also by John Ferris. Have not read either of these yet. But John Ferris was, I believe, a pretty big horror author back in like the 70s, throughout the 90s, I believe. But yeah, haven't read either of these yet. We have Hellcat by Amanda Kingsley. I have not read this yet, but I'm excited to because I love stories about cats, especially in horror. I don't know why. It's something I'm really into, I guess. So excited to check this one out at some point. We have Bloodshift by Garfield Reeves Stevens. This here is called The Plants by Kenneth McKinney. We have Cthulhu, The Mythos, and Kindred Horrors, edited by Robert E. Howard. Actually, this whole collection is by Robert E. Howard, I believe. Yes, I should know. I've read this one already. This is just his short stories that are about the Cthulhu mythos, and some stories are better than others. I thought it was a decent enough read. This one is not a horror novel. This is just kind of mixed in with my horror paperbacks. This is The Girl of the Sea of Cortez by Peter Benchley. And I believe this is more like a fantasy novel, I think. I don't know. I haven't read it yet, so I don't know a whole lot about it. But I do have another Peter Benchley book somewhere in my stacks that we'll get to later on. But yeah, there's that one. We have Ghost by J.N. Williamson. Ooh, this one I'm excited to show you guys. This is one I found very recently. This is Deadly Impulse by Carolyn Mason. And this book, I don't know if you guys can tell or not, but this one has artwork or cover art done by Tim Jacobus. And this is very, very cool. And I tried looking this book up online and I couldn't even find a listing for it. So I was very excited to find a copy of this. I don't know exactly how rare it is or how much it typically goes for. But yeah, very cool cover on this one and excited to have this in my collection. All right, next up we have The Night of the Moonbow by Thomas Tryon. This one here is Tricycle by Russell Rhodes. Beware the tricycle. This one here is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I have read this already, and I thought it was decent. Not quite the amazing classic that everyone makes it out to be. There's actually some short stories at the end of this book after the main novel I Am Legend, and I think I actually enjoyed those short stories more than the book itself. So yeah, but it was still decent. This one is The Bones by Sherry S. Tepper. This one is Night Vision's Hardshell. This is a collection of 3 novellas, one by Dean Koontz, Robert McCammon, and Edward Bryant. This one is The Other by Thomas Tryon. I have not read anything by Thomas Tryon yet, but I know he was a pretty popular horror author as well back in the 80s. The Ceremonies by T.E.D. Klein. Have not read this yet. Carrying Comfort by Dan Simmons. I have another Dan Simmons book somewhere that I'm sure will pop up at some point. This is a pretty long book. I think this one is like 700. Holy crap, 900 pages. And I believe this is a vampire novel. I've heard good things about it. I've seen some people like review this one, I think. So I'm excited to check this out at some point. But yeah, this is quite the lengthy novel here. We have Whatever Happened to Baby Jane by Henry Farrell. Toyland by Florence Ramey. Ooh, this is one I'm excited to show you guys. This is one that I also just found out at a used bookstore for really cheap, and this one has very sick cover art. I love this. This is called Obelisk by Erin M. Ellie, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. And then it has amazing step back art where you open it up and it reveals the face of the obelisk. Unfortunately, there is a rip here on the front cover, but I don't know. It was only a couple dollars, so I decided to buy it anyway, even though the cover is a little bit tattered there. Next up, we have The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. I have not read anything by Clive Barker yet, surprisingly. I know he's considered one of the great horror authors and has written a ton of classics, but I just haven't read anything by him for some reason. I don't know why, but at some point I'll be reading this one since I have it in my collection now. This next one is also one of my favorite covers in my horror book collection. This thing is awesome. This is called Sins of the Flesh by Don Davis and Jay Davis. And this one also has amazing step back art. I mean, look at that. Absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, and I actually did read this too, and surprisingly it wasn't bad. I kind of liked it. A lot of the times with these old vintage horror novels, the stories usually aren't quite as good as the cover art. The cover arts on these kind of sold the books, to be honest, and a lot of these stories just are kind of a letdown, but this one was pretty good. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, so yeah. Alright, let me round up another stack of books. Okay, I found my other Dan Simmons book, and it is Summer of Night. Next up, we have The Manse by Lisa Cantrell. And this is one I've actually read a couple times. I read this many, many years ago in my teens. My library actually had a copy of this book, and I borrowed it from them back when I was like 15 or 16. I don't remember how old I was. And a friend of mine actually bought this for me and sent me a copy because this is a really rare book that's hard to find now, and I wanted to reread it. And I reread it a couple of years ago, I believe. And it was still pretty good. It didn't quite hold up as well as I thought it would, but it was still an enjoyable book. We have The Bog by Michael Talbot. This one also has kind of a cool step back cover. Destiny's Carnival by Warren Murphy and Mark Brownwood. I did read this one, and this one was actually not bad too. I enjoyed this book. This is more like a dark fantasy horror novel, and it also has like a carnival setting, which is really cool. I love carnival settings in horror stories, and this is a very lean book. It's only like a couple hundred pages, and I love that cover art too. Just gorgeous. The cover on this book is absolutely terrifying. This is Black Ice by Pat Graverson. Such a cool cover on that. Haven't read it though, so I don't know if it's any good. This one is also a very, very cool cover. This is Sleep by Lynn Bearderstadt, if that's how you pronounce her name correctly. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, it's a pretty cool one. Next up, we have Gwen in Green by Hugh Zachary. This is a reprint. This is part of the Paperbacks from Hell reprint line published by Valancourt Books, where Grady Hendrix selected some of these old vintage horror paperbacks and decided to reprint them. So yeah, here's that one. We have The Pack by David Fisher. Addison House by Claire McNally. The Howling by Gary Brander. I actually did read this somewhat recently. I have a video up on my channel where I review this and then kind of compare it to the movie, if you guys want to check that out. I have Castaways by Brian Keene. Off Season by Jack Ketchum, which I did read, and this is a very gory and violent book. It's pretty cool. A Nest of Nightmares by Lisa Tuttle. This is a short story collection, and this is also part of the Paperbacks from Hell reprint line, and I wasn't a huge fan of this one, if I'm being honest. The Nest by Gregory Douglas. This is also part of the Paperback from Hell reprint line. I have not read this one yet. And then I have one more from the Paperback from Hell reprint line. This is Hellhound by Ken Greenhall. Have not read that one either. Okay, we have The Killing Kind by Brian Smith. Have not read it. We have Depraved by Brian Smith. I have read this one, and it is super effed up. This is the most disturbing and graphic and shocking book that I have ever read. But it was still good. It kept me turning the pages and wanting to know what happened next. So, yeah, it's pretty good. House of Blood by Brian Smith. Have not read this one yet. But I decided to go out and kind of search for more of his books after reading Depraved, if that says anything. And then lastly, The Freak Show by Brian Smith. I'll probably read this one next. I'm kind of excited to get to this one because, again, I really like carnival and freak show type settings, that sort of thing. So yeah. We have Ghost Monster by Simon Clark. I read one Simon Clark book called The Tower a long time ago, and I remember not being the biggest fan of it, but I wanted to give this author another shot. So yeah, I just kind of bought this on impulse out of the used bookstore. Oh, I found my other Peter Benchley book. This one is called White Shark. This one also has kind of cool step back art to it. And this book was a fun little, creature feature. It's basically about this Nazi killer cyborg shark that's half human, half machine, or not half human, half shark, half machine. And yeah, this isn't great by any means, but it was just sort of a cheesy, fun creature feature. I enjoyed it for what it was. Have a werewolf novel, The Changing by F.W. Armstrong. Nightmare Seasons by Charles Grant. Alright, now we're getting into an author that I have a lot of books by, but for some reason I have not read anything by this author yet. I can't tell you why. I don't even know why I keep buying books by this author. And the author in question is Robert McCammon. This one is The Night Boat. I'm hoping I really like his books, because if not, I have a whole bunch that I'm stuck with. If I don't like them at all, maybe I'll get rid of them. I try to keep my book collection somewhat compact and minimalized by sort of filtering through the books that I don't like or care about as much. I'll take them into used bookstores for credit or sell them or just do whatever with them. I try to, for the most part, keep books that I actually like and care about. If I read some of these books you're seeing in my collection might not be in my collection, a year from now or whatever. But anyway, yeah, I have a lot of these books by Robert McCammon. That's the first one. I also have this one here, Mystery Walk. Gone South. The Wolf's Hour. Mine. Ball, or Bal, or however you pronounce that. I think that's like some kind of demon or something. I think. I could be mistaken. Stinger. I basically have every book this guy wrote, and I still haven't read one. This is another copy of The Wolf's Hour. This is like a different edition in cover art. I like the other one a lot better, but this one is in a lot better condition. That other one is a bit rough. So I think I kind of was hanging on to both of them until I could decide which one I wanted to keep and get rid of. But yeah, here's another copy of The Wolf's Hour. Boy's Life. I've heard great things about this book. I've heard from a lot of people that this is like one of their all-time favorite books they've ever read. I think it's supposed to be like a coming of age, kind of like dark fantasy with some horror elements to it. And I've just heard so many positive things about it that I will definitely be reading this at some point. So yeah, there's that one. And then a couple more by Robert McCammon. And this one is Usher's Passing, which is actually like a sequel to The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. So yeah, I'm kind of curious to maybe read that at some point. And then lastly, we have Blue World, which is Robert McCammon's short story collection. So yeah, I might actually start with this one. I feel like maybe that would be a good place to start with his work, is maybe by reading some of his short stories. So maybe I'll read this at some point. I say that, maybe. That's the key word. Okay, moving on to one of my favorite authors. I have quite a few paperbacks from this guy. You've already seen some hardcovers, of course, from him. And we are talking about Dean Koontz once again. This one is The Voice of the Night. This one is Midnight. And I have read all of these Dean Koontz novels that I'm showing you guys. This one is Intensity. I also have the paperback copy of this book as well. I have Twilight Eyes. This is a newer, like, reprinted edition. And this one has like a little bit of bonus material in the back, kind of like just a short afterward interview kind of thing with Dean Koontz, which is really the only reason I have this one in my collection. Shattered. This is the old original printing of Twilight Eyes. One of my favorite Dean Koontz novels. I want to reread this soon because it's been a while now. I believe I read this like 7 or 8 years ago. Very first Koontz novel I ever read that made me fall in love with him. And I kind of want to reread this to see if it holds up. And again, this is like a carnival type horror story, or at least like the first half of the book takes place in a carnival setting. And I remember thinking it was just like the coolest thing ever. So I'm curious to read this again and see how well it holds up after having read, you know, all of his other works over the years. Watchers. And then lastly, we have Cold Fire. All right, I have a few more Ramsey Campbell paperbacks. I had a couple hardcovers I showed off, but I have a few of his paperbacks as well. This one is called The Influence. This one also has really neat step back art to it. This one is Obsession. Again, have not read anything by Ramsey Campbell yet. Another author I have many books by, but I have not read one. I don't know why. Too many books to read, too little time. This one is The Face That Must Die. And then this one is The Hungry Moon. I also have the hardcover edition of this one. I'm not sure why I have 2 copies of it. I think because I like the covers on both of them, so I don't know which one I want to keep. But yeah, there's that. And then to close off my adult horror collection, I think anyway, it's very possible in this just mess and pile of books that I have on the floor that I missed a stack somewhere or missed a few here and there. But I can tell you at least that this is like the majority of my adult horror collection. So to close things off, I have a few books by Peter Straub, another very popular horror author. This one is Shadowland. This one is Floating Dragon. Have not read either of those 2 yet. And then lastly, we have Ghost Story. And I have read this one very recently, actually. I believe I read this back in January. And it was actually pretty good. I enjoyed it. So I will definitely be reading his other 2 books at some point. So yeah, that is my adult horror book collection, guys. If you have any thoughts on any of these books, let me know what they are down in the comments below. I cannot wait to fill up my new bookshelf here behind me with all of these books that I showed off. And that's all I have for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.